What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and I'm back with a familiar face if you've been dealing with all of these licenses and OGLs and situations we've had here. So my good friend Noah. So welcome again, Noah.
Hey
Uh
man, how you doing?
Good. This time I feel like we're in a last time it was much more dire straits.
Yeah, it was urgent. It was scary. It was, hey man, can you talk like in the alley? I got
Yeah.
some updates.
Yeah. This is on a more positive note, something we'd
Mhm.
heard about for a while. This was the ORC license from Paizo. This was their open RPG creative license, their
Mhm.
direct counter to what was at the time the OGL 1.1 and 1.2 and all of that nonsense. So
Mhm.
we've been hearing about this since January. And we now have a draft version of the base document exists. It came out Friday, the 7th. And I am not a lawyer. So it's not that long, too, which is also a nice thing. It is, what is it, 5 pages?
It's 4 pages on my end plus answers and explanations document. So pretty short actually. But it is definitely full of legalese. Let's put it that way. I'm earning my money today.
All right. And just real quick, I mean, they can see the documentation behind you, but if people are
Mhm.
new and they're just coming over here because they're fans of Pathfinder or Paizo and they're not
Right.
really kind of sure who you are, your credibility behind this, why don't you just tell us who you are?
Yeah, of course. My name is Noah Downs. I'm a lawyer, but I'm a cool lawyer. I'm known online by the handle My Lawyer Friend. All these pieces of paper behind me show that I am, in fact, a licensed and accredited lawyer. And I've been weighing in on things regarding tabletop and gaming for a very long time. I partner at the law firm Premack Rogers PC. And one thing I do need to do at the top of this is do a quick disclaimer, which is everything I'm about to say is for informational purposes only. It is not legal advice. Do not have I do not have an attorney-client relationship with you in particular, unless I actually do, like you're one of my clients, in which case, hello. Um, However, I am available for hire. Your circumstances may almost always be different. So what I'm trying to say is don't take this as legal advice. Um, Go over to a friend's house to try it.
Yeah, fair enough. So, we had a post on Paizo's blog Friday,
Mm-hmm.
the 7th, that says it's basically here it is. The first draft, public draft is available. Um, Feedback, they're searching for feedback of individual publishers on the official Oracle License Project Discord, which they do have a link for that. You can
Right.
download the license and then again the answers and explanations document. They said they're continue to refine it. Azora will be soliciting comments and feedback through that platform between now and next Friday, the 21st, at which point they'll incorporate that feedback and release a new public draft. If additional rounds of commentary are required, the process will continue until the license is complete and meets the majority of participating publishers' needs. They want to wrap it up before the end of April. Is that a reasonable time frame to do something like this?
I think it is. I mean, they've been working on it for about 3 months now. Candidly, our law firm has been working with Azora Law on parts of this. We've been representing tabletop creators and publishers as well, third party content creators, and their interests to make sure that those people are represented in the drafting of this process. And so, I think that it is reasonable. What I do appreciate just from the jump is that this license literally at the top says draft only,
Hmm.
feedback requested, and it's not offered with a signature line.
I was gonna make a comment about that. You beat me to it. Yeah. I'm
Sorry.
gonna go ahead and put it up on screen here. So you'll lose us, but you'll see the license here.
Mhm.
And it is very simplistic, black and white. Yep,
Mhm.
right at the top. Draft only, even with a draft only feedback requested watermark on it as well.
Yep.
So yeah, it's very short, which is I think that's also part of what we want to have. We don't want to have these large, lengthy documents because you can lose a lot of stuff. And frankly, I'm again no lawyer, but the original OGL was like 2 pages,
Yeah.
so I they can be that short.
Mhm.
Um, so why don't we go ahead and dive in? And why don't you? We'll just start at the top. I've got it on the screen here. You just talk. We'll go through. We're at part 1 here, definitions, and just walk
Yeah.
us through.
Yeah, so obviously we see some familiar terms here. You see the first thing is product identity, which a lot of us will recognize as a term from the underlying OGL, which of course Azora Law is helmed by Brian Lewis, who did contribute to and significantly draft as the primary drafter on the original OGL. Product identity is a term that Brian is very familiar with, as he is the one that kind of made its use more mainstream with the OGL. As we were kind of talking to Azora Law going through this, he was trying to actually get away from the term product identity. But if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Product identity is identified as effectively the content that is made by the creator. So this is the stuff that if you were to create the Nerd Immersion RPG or the Nerd Immersion Adventure, the Nerd Immersion item, whatever it is. This is everything that you put into that item. It doesn't include game mechanics. It is all of the stuff, all of the guts and creative expression that you are putting out there. And so product identity is your work.
Okay.
Next thing you see orc content. I'm actually going to skip orc content a little bit real quick and go down to and point out that there really isn't anything defining game mechanics in here, which is, we're seeing a little bit of feedback online saying, hey, why is game mechanics not specifically identified, defined in here? Well, that's because it has a definition under copyright law. Game mechanics have an existing definition. So when you're looking at what this license is trying to do, it's trying to account for 3 situations. One is a type of content that you have made. That is your product identity. Then there's game mechanics. It's the underlying mechanics of whatever you're working with. Then you put those 2 circles together to create a Venn diagram. And what's in the middle is stuff that's either in a gray area or it's stuff that you created, but you want to license out to other people. And that is orc content.
Okay.
Orc content is work that you want to put out into the world for people to use.
Okay.
It is something that you're licensing out there.
Yeah, it does seem like the orc content section very clearly lists a lot of things that are not basically covered, right? Is that what I'm reading here?
Yeah, basically. So orc content is effectively content that it's a way to add your content to the pool of licensed works. So this is kind of getting towards another kind of Creative Commons license. So as we're all aware at this point, WotC ended up going towards the Creative Commons side of things, putting the SRD 5.1 into the Creative Commons with an attribution Creative Commons license.
Right.
The orc content recognizes one, that you want to have attribution for the work that you put into the world, but you also want to put work into the world for other people to have. It's a share alike license, meaning that you're allowed to share works out there and you can license them using this. So there's another type of Creative Commons license called CC BY SA 4.0. And that SA means share alike, meaning, if you contribute to this pool of works, then other people can use that as long as they appropriately credit you. That is the BY section.
Okay.
So basically this is allowing you to contribute to the pool of tabletop.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So then that now adapted orc content is that
now we're getting into the fun technical part of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and to be clear, I don't know how into the weeds you want to go, buddy.
Well, I mean, what I'm going to say is we'll say probably 90% of the people that are going to come to this video are coming to it with my level of understanding of the law, but they want to know, ultimately, I'd say, what makes this good?
Yeah.
And what makes this, like, aside from the fact that, like, right, 5.1 is in Creative Commons, but, like, I want to make content for Pathfinder 2nd edition, or I want to make content for one of the other partners that has joined the Orc license, or I want to make my own new thing not tied to 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, but I
Right.
want to have some kind of protection. We don't let me start right there. Why would I want to have a license of some kind as protection, period? So I make the Nerd Immersion RPG. It's wholly
Mhm.
original. It's not based on any other base system mechanics or SRD. Why would I want to have a license on my side?
You would want to have a license on your side to effectively govern how other people could use your works.
Okay.
It is your way of instituting control and quality checks into that process of other people using your stuff. Now, if you are just planning to put it into the world for people to play, but not to adapt in any way,
Mm,
say you're not going to allow people to make maps and other stuff like that, then necessarily you'd only need a gameplay license, which is a license to play the game, which is included typically when you purchase a game and stuff like that. It's an implied license. So if you want to put it into the world for other people to adapt and work with and contribute to the nerd immersion universe, so to
mm,
speak, and then you would want to have that license, because a license at the end of the day is a contract. And contracts save friendships and contracts save relationships.
mm,
And it also eliminates ambiguity. So not only does it set the rules of engagement, so to speak, but also it helps answer questions of, well, what if I add to this? What if I expand on this? What if I take something that you did and I improve it? What happens? Who owns that? That kind of thing. Can suddenly you repackage that and go out into the world and say, hey, this is mine now? In some cases, depending on the terms of the license, yeah.
okay.
In other cases, no.
So it's basically, as like you're saying, in the most layman's of terms here, I'm allowing people to iterate on my content
Right.
uh legally, right? I'm saying like, hey, I made the Nerd Immersion RPG. If you'd like to take the Nerd Immersion RPG and possibly use it to go make money off of it, or some
Right.
kind of thing, or use it in some way other than my intended use, which is the base game,
Mhm.
that allows you to do it. But it protects you from me, but it also protects me from you trying to repackage my stuff down the road as well.
Exactly. And it ensures, depending on the terms of your license, it ensures that you are able to put any restrictions or bars you want out there. And that's super important. For example, you could see a world in which somebody could try and take the nerd immersion tabletop RPG system and apply it towards hate speech and
Mm,
promotion thereof, and you wouldn't want that. So your
no.
license, you would want to be able to pull that back.
Okay. So that is, for folks that were curious, that's why you need a
Right.
license, why you would want to have a license.
Hmm.
Now, you could undergo the potentially expensive and time consuming effort of hiring a lawyer or a law firm to design your own the Nerd Immersion license.
Right.
That's a specific license for me that I've made that has whatever kind of stipulations and legalese I want to work in there that could be very weasel wordy to get me. You own it, you make stuff, and then I own all of the content that you make within my license. And you need to pay me royalties and whatever other kind of nonsense I'd want to come up with and throw in there. I could do
Yeah.
that if I
To be
made.
clear, in every license, I like to include a zombie apocalypse provision too, so that would definitely make it in there.
Right, exactly. So that's what I'm saying. Like, these things can definitely happen if I
Mhm,
make my own.
mhm.
But that may not be something, especially if it's someone like me or someone that's just getting started and has something really cool they want to do and get out into the world, but they don't have the money and the time to hire a whole legal team to pen a specific license. But they
Right.
could say, okay, well, what other options do I have? And
Mhm,
previously, if it was 5th edition based, you'd had the open gaming license.
mhm.
Now you can use Creative Commons if you're in a 5e world. But what if you don't want to do that? You want to still have a license to protect your work, but you're going to make literally anything else. It seems like that's the intention of the orc license, especially from the variety of different companies that have signed on to this, from things like Pathfinder, Paizo, Cobalt Press, but then also places
Mhm.
like Chaosium. Did Free League join org too? I forget.
I need to double check. I think I saw them somewhere in there. Um, and I mean, that's the thing is, at the end of the day, you could still go if you want to license your stuff out there. You can still avail yourself of the other licenses. That's why the Creative Commons licensing system exists. Those are vetted. Those are backed by a strong authority with Creative Commons. And that might be an option to go. But what they're doing here with this orc license is providing something that is ostensibly tailored to the tabletop community, a one of its kind license, so to speak. And it gives you the option to kind of contribute to the tabletop community as a whole and to
Hmm.
put things out in there and build the overall pool and common consensus of works there. So I think that's a noble goal.
Hmm.
A lot of people right now are asking, well, why do we have the org? Creative Commons exists. I
Sure.
mean, it's a question that even Azora asked at one point during this process of why don't we just use CC BY SA? So we'll use a share alike license. And the reason is we want to set our own boundaries on what is our community. We
Mm.
want to plant our flag and say this is tabletop, not like this is Sparta. Actually, if we should get that like that on a shirt,
Mm.
this is tabletop, and this is our rules. This is how we play in this sandbox, and this is for the community as a whole. And so that is why the orc came to this iteration.
That makes sense to me. I mean, it's like you said, Creative Commons is nice, but it's very broad spectrum, right? It's
Right.
for everything, for everybody. I mean, I'm sure if we looked into it, we could find something completely erroneous, unrelated, from the farthest thing you could think of from tabletop that uses Creative Commons. Whereas this is something, as you said, it's made by tabletop gamers for
Right.
tabletop gamers with that in mind. So ultimately, yeah, you could cast this wide net of Creative Commons and you'll get some stuff,
Hmm.
but better to have something designed with the specific entity in mind. And again, that's why not every company in the entire world uses Creative Commons. You can
Right.
imagine that Disney lawyers and Disney contracts are immensely more specific than, somebody on PBS, right? Like it's,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's, you're going to take it and you're going to hone in on what's important to you and craft a license that works and hits the, checks the boxes you need.
What's funny is that I was getting ready to comment on, yeah, the original OGL was 2 pages. This one's 4 pages. It's really getting out of control. And then you bring up a Disney license, and I literally reviewed a Disney license last week that was 54 pages.
So, I mean, there you go, right? Like it's but that's my point, right? Is like
Right.
anybody, like technically Disney could use Creative Commons. They obviously wouldn't because then they would lose the rights to all of their characters, but
Woo.
I mean, that's a whole nother topic. But that's why Orc over, like I said, if you are rolling in the dough or you've got your own legal team on retainer for
Right.
whatever you're doing, that probably makes more sense for you, right? To go
Yeah.
do that. But if you're more kind of, and I mean, let's be honest, we know what it's like to be in the tabletop space. Chances are, any way you can save money is going to be a
Yeah.
good thing for you. So if another team and a noble, valiant effort to make it for you was going to take all that burden away, this is probably the best way to go.
Avail yourself of it. Yeah, I mean, like in the interest of saving money, and frankly, almost counterintuitive to my efforts because I'm a lawyer that would love to have more clients.
Sure.
The whether you're rich or poor, it's good to have money. So if you can shortcut and use somebody else's work, as long as you're confident that it is right for you, do it. And I think that what they're trying to do here at the orc is to put something out there that is accessible and usable. I will say my primary criticism of this orc, and before we dive into the grant of terms under this,
Hmm.
is that it is more legalese than I would have liked to see. And I say that as a lawyer.
Okay.
Um, we're gonna get into things that, frankly, I don't even think we should dive into on a YouTube video such as sui generis database rights.
I saw that and I have no idea what that is.
So that is something that sui generis database rights are something that I've only encountered like I think twice in my career.
Okay.
And it's not because I haven't encountered like what they are. It's just that nobody ever calls them that.
Okay.
So it is highly specialized stuff. But to kind of dive into it,
All right. Yeah.
some of the things that we're happy to see here is that you, as a person who is the recipient of the grant of rights under this license, the licensee, so to speak, are receiving key things, including a worldwide royalty-free, which is huge compared to what the OGL 1.1 was, non-sublicensable, I'll get into that, non-exclusive, and irrevocable license to exercise the license rights in the ORC content and to use the ORC content. Basically, the ORC content being what the original creator has put into the world under this license. You as the recipient of that, the person that wants to use that creator's work, have a worldwide royalty-free non-sublicensable, meaning you cannot sublicense it to somebody else. You can't give somebody else the right. Non-exclusive, meaning you're not the only person in the world that can do it. And irrevocable, meaning that once you exercise this right, whatever you exercise it with regard to is safe. It cannot be revoked.
Yeah. It's a big
To
word,
use our
irrevocable,
content.
as we know. Sometimes people
Uh,
just don't want to say it, even though there's no reason to not say it. But
sometimes people want to change the definition of irrevocable
that,
into something that doesn't actually mean.
yeah,
But you notice that irrevocable here isn't defined because it has a clear definition
in and of itself,
in
yeah.
contract law. So, but so that is all to say that this is the license that we want.
Okay.
This is great. The non-sublicensable is mostly okay, frankly, because it's mostly okay, frankly, because whoever you would want to sublicense it to could also avail themselves of the ORC. I do have a few tweaks to this particular section, which is Roman numeral 2A, grants and limitations, primary grant to you, that I'm going to be suggesting to Azora Law. However, for the most part, this is where I would want to see it at this point in this iteration. And that kind of lends itself to why I think that end of April is a reasonable goal.
Okay. That's good then. I mean, that's, like I said, those are all of the key buzzwords that everybody wanted to hear in the OGL drafts that were going around. Again, ultimately, we didn't land there because of Creative Commons, but we've got it all here in the ORC.
Right.
All right, so this says you to exercise the license rights in authorize you to exercise the license rights in all media and formats, whether known or hereafter created, and to make technical modifications necessary to do so. So my interpretation of that means whether that's a physical product printed on paper, a digital product on a PDF, a virtual tabletop, potentially a video game, a TV series, a movie. Is that all covered under this kind of a thing?
Yeah, absolutely. That means that you can take and interpose and transcribe from various medium to other mediums. And so it is absolutely fantastic. If it's ORC content and you're exercising this license thereon, then you're good to go. And in the answers and explanations document that they did put out, they specifically do contemplate that. Stating like, hey, I have a major IP. I want to make a movie. Can I use this kind of thing?
And then I also like, contrary to some of the stuff we'd heard from WotC, or hereafter created. Meaning, even if the technology does not exist yet, you're still covered under this license.
Right.
Which was one of the potential reasons why we had heard the OGL changes were going to be happening, was because of the changes in technology and NFTs and yada yada yada. They need to do it to protect themselves against it. And really, in one simple line here, the ORC protects you in perpetuity.
It does. It's fantastic. Now, where this starts to get a little weird is This license is a fantastic license, and if they stopped at Roman numeral 2A, primary grant to you, then you would have effectively a CC, a Creative Commons attribution license. A
Hmm.
little bit better, but effectively that. Section
S-
B,
Yeah, this adapted content is the one that's kind of been
yeah,
irking me so far.
Section B is a share alike provision.
Hmm.
So adaptive ORC content, that term that I said, hey, let's not get too into the weeds. I
Yeah.
guess we kind of have to, don't we? Which is
Yeah.
kind of demonstrate why I think this should be dumbed down just a little bit. Is the adapted ORC content is derivative works based on the ORC content that you create to the extent that they would otherwise constitute ORC content. What that means
Uh-huh.
is that if you improve upon the content that is licensed to you, if you create what we call a derivative work based on the stuff that is licensed to you,
Uh-huh.
then you're going to put that back out into the world under the same terms of this same license.
Okay.
So if you improve upon something, then it goes out into the world. Now, if you attach your own product identity to it, then you can retain that product identity, but the underlying improvement will still go out there. So it'll become this amorphous improvement blob, so to speak.
Okay. So I make the Nerd Immersion RPG. I
Yeah.
license it under the org. And then I have an epiphany 5 years down the road. Oh my
Mhm.
God, this is such a thing. It's so much better. How come I didn't think of this 5 years ago? Nerd Immersion RPG second edition. And I
Mhm.
want to put it out into the world. Does
Mhm.
that fall under this adapted content because I'm reiterating on what I'd already done?
Sort of. So think of it more like a transaction between two parties in that case. So in
Okay.
this case, if Nerd Immersion RPG puts out widget,
Mm-hmm.
widget being generic term,
Sure.
and then I take under this license, and you put everything out under the orc license. I take widget and create widget plus one.
Ah, okay.
And then I put like a coat of paint on widget plus one. Coat of paint is my product identity. It's what I've put onto the widget. But the underlying improvement of widget plus one will then go back out into the world and in theory improve the pool of underlying content and overall better the community. Does that make sense?
I think so. So who owns that then?
Nobody.
Oh.
No, I'm kidding. You technically do own it, but you don't really have too many rights to it. You do need to you own your improvement. However, you grant a license back out to everybody under these terms. So you're an owner in name only, and so far as like it's attributed back to you.
Okay. I get what you're saying. So again, if we were to equate this to say like a D&D 3.5 to a Pathfinder, right?
Yeah,
They took 3.5, they slapped a new coat of paint on it called a Pathfinder,
right.
put it out into the world, assuming let's say it was all under the orc license. Any improvements they made to like existing class features or whatever else that was out there now are kind of just floating on for everybody to use now, but like it would be attributed back to the original creator,
Right.
but they nobody owns it. It's just kind of now for anybody to use.
So somebody would own it. In that case, Paizo, who had done the improvement, would own it, but it
Okay,
would the use of it would go back out into the world.
I
So
see.
Paizo would like it's golden handcuffs, so to speak.
Uh,
Hey, yeah, you can improve upon this, but you have no choice but to release it back out into the world, stripped of product identity, of course, because we don't want to lose our copyrights and trademarks. But
sure.
stripped of its product identity, if you make an improvement, it comes back out, and then from there you make a further iteration of it, Pathfinder 2e, and then from there you make a further iteration of it, 1D&D. I mean, sorry, next video. So
Uh, uh, so why would you put a provision like this in a license? What's the benefit, or what do you think the reasoning is behind this?
so the idea behind this license is that it's not a license that's owned by any particular entity. The
Hmm.
OGL is owned by Wizards of the Coast.
Sure.
This license is technically owned by Azora Law. and because they filed for the copyright for this license.
Mhm.
It's a registered copyright with the U.S. Copyright Office. However, the idea is that this license is owned by the people, capital
Right.
P.
Sure.
Um, so if you are exercising your rights under this license, they want you to say, hey, while you're receiving a benefit, the community is too.
Okay.
If you are sharpening your own knife, that whetstone's also getting better use.
I see. Okay. So it sounded like, like you said if it was stopped at 2A, it would have
Mhm.
basically been a tailored Creative Commons, but this 2B tweaks it. Again, not legal advice, but in your opinion, does this 2B, and maybe you can't speak to it, but I don't know, is that like, would you have included something if you were in charge of this license from top to bottom? Would you have included a provision like this, or would you have left it out?
It is definitely a copyleft provision.
Hmm.
Copyleft is a legal movement, so to speak, which is free everything.
Okay.
And it's very copyleft. Now that's not a problem. I might have considered something like this. I will say that as my particular persuasion is I would get a little anxious recommending that this iteration be used because frankly we don't have case law under this
Hmm.
license, meaning that I don't want my client as a third party creator to be the one that accidentally puts something into the world that they didn't mean to using this.
Okay, I got you.
And that's why we do have clear delineations on the tables that are included, for example, of hey, this is product identity, this is org content, this is the attribution, etc.
Mm.
Um, this does, I think, need for the avoidance of doubt section, which is commonly used by lawyers to say, here's an example of how this would work, kind
I
of thing.
think that would be very helpful, especially for
Yeah,
people like me who just had to walk through 3 or 4 examples to get a handle on what it is. So,
absolutely. And I do think that we are kind of um while I do think the answers and explanations document is helpful,
mm.
going into this particular detail with this particular section is something that maybe it could be improved on.
All right. Well, then number or 2C is this fancy sui generis.
It's very generous.
Well, it's not we generous, it's sui
Yeah.
generis, but
So sui generis,
yeah.
database right basically protects the contents of your database.
Okay.
That's what a sui generis database right is. So you or the maker of any database can prevent extraction of data from a database, or reuse of a substantial part of the database's content. So you're basically giving this license grants you the right to grab the contents of a database if that's where the org content that is licensed to you is stored.
What constitutes a database?
Great question. It's not defined under here.
Okay, is this Google Drive a database? If I
Google
drop,
Drive is Google Drive is easily a database. The question becomes, um, is just a one Excel spreadsheet a database?
okay.
Is a Word document a database? So this part is more of an access provision than anything else.
Hmm.
But it is important. So I will say that as a lawyer, I did scratch my head when I saw sui generis database rights. I was like, wow, I haven't heard that word in a long time.
So yeah, if it's something that's so infrequently used, why do you think it appears here?
I think that and having worked with them on this license,
Hmm.
Azor Law is trying to be thorough.
Okay.
I think that they are fantastic lawyers, and it's been a pleasure to work with them on this. Um, and they are very good at certain things, and this is one of the things that I think they identified early on of, yeah, we just want to make sure this is out there just in case. And just from a legal drafting perspective, to me that means that they've run into an issue with it before, so they want to
Fair.
make sure it's specifically called out. So. Like,
Uh,
for example, I include in all my contracts now a clause for you to get out if there's terrestrial, extraterrestrial war. And that's frankly because of all of the UFO sightings we had in Northern America. So
I mean, it's a thing, right?
it is.
A couple years ago, that would have seemed like nonsense, but
Yeah.
all right. So then we get on to limitations. Anything? I'm reading through this, just kind of scanning it. I don't see anything that jumps out at me. Is there anything worth kind of pulling
So,
out from that?
so this goes into moral rights just a
Yeah,
little bit.
yeah.
So the right of integrity,
Mm-hmm.
um, it specifically says that moral rights and calls out the right of integrity. It
Yeah.
says they're not licensed under this org license. So a moral right is your, right to be, right to have yourself attributed as the owner of a work,
Mm-hmm.
which is another completely separate section of this license. It's literally an attribution license.
Mm-hmm.
But the right of integrity is the right to make sure that your work isn't going to be mutilated, and without your permission. And so that's specifically not licensed. Neither is the right of publicity, privacy, or other personality rights. So, for example, if you did the Nerd Immersion tabletop and you did license under this, you would have some control to make sure that it couldn't be mutilated or associated with, hate speech and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah, I don't
You'd
want my
also
name
have
tied to that.
yeah, and also with the right of publicity, privacy, and personality rights, you have the right to not have your face, name, all that stuff directly tied to the work that is being published as well.
Okay.
So, for example, I couldn't go out and say, "Hey, I created this adventure. It is for the Nerd Immersion podcast," and then start throwing your legal name out there and say, this person's endorsing it, that kind of thing.
I see. Okay. Gotcha. And then let's see. To the extent possible, the licensor waives any right to collect royalties from you for the license of the license right and
Now,
use of
this
Orcon.
is interesting
Yeah.
because you think it says royalty free as part of the
Correct.
grant.
Yeah.
There are certain royalties that you theoretically cannot waive, or there's certain royalties that later on might be subject to changes in the law that are unwaivable. And interestingly, this kind of implicates that this license is thinking about multimedia use,
Okay.
such as music, where
Uh,
there's statutory licenses for use for playing certain songs and stuff like that, where you can't typically waive your royalties to those because it's required by statute. Or, I mean, you can, but it's a long, complicated process. So what this is basically saying is, guys, just in case there's any royalties out there, we're expressly and explicitly waiving them, to the extent possible. And the reason it says to the extent possible is because they don't want this entire section, this subsection Roman numeral lowercase III,
mhm.
to be invalidated in the event that it's later found to say, hey, you can't waive this royalty. That would be illegal.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's kind of a future proofing thing.
Yeah.
And like you said, I guess it sounds like it's to prevent people from trying to either use this license as a means to get around certain royalties, I
Right.
guess. Right. So
Mhm.
okay, that makes sense. All right.
Section Roman numeral 3, the required notice, literally just goes into the notice required. There's no surprises here, necessarily.
I did
Um,
see Gen Con thrown in there.
yeah, Azora Law and Gen Con are specifically in there. So
So
it's in.
what? So Azora Law I get, but Gen
Yep.
Con?
Yeah, there's some ownership of Gen Con that is crossing over there. I don't know how much is of that is public. Hopefully people in the comments can identify that for us.
Yeah.
But that the Gen Con is tied to Azora in certain ways.
Well, I can't click the link because it says file not found. If I click the link in here, it says gencon.com/work license. So,
That's right.
all right. Okay. Interesting. I'm very curious about that.
Now, here's a section that is important, and it was part of the reason why Wizards of the Coast wanted to update the Open Gaming license originally.
Just the attribution notice.
Now, the warranty and limitation of liability, section 4 on the next page.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
So the underlying OGL was missing a lot of basic terms, such as a venue provision, jurisdiction provision, disclaimer of liabilities, all that kind of stuff. Which kind of left Wizards of the Coast up to be open for litigation. They could be sued anywhere without notice, and it sucked. So to that extent, I kind of understand why they were trying to update it for that point. Now, what this is basically saying is that the person licensing this content is licensing it as is, as it's available. It's not going to be, it's not going to have any, they're not making any representations or warranties, which are effectively legal promises that it's going to not infringe on something. Like if you download it and use it and it's the Nerd Immersion tabletop, but for some reason it has like DBZ in it.
Yeah, gotcha.
And, they're not promising that wasn't, that you're going to be safe to use this for whatever purpose you want it to. This is basically saying, if you run into bumps in the road with this license, as long as the licensor properly licensed this stuff, and to a certain extent, even if they didn't, they're not responsible. You're getting this as is. And if you get in this car and it doesn't actually have tires, then that's not on the licensor.
Gotcha. Okay. I think the rest of this looks to make sense to me here from the warranty side of things. Anything else in here in this section?
No, I think that the warranties and limitation of liability section is one of the most pro licensor that I've seen in a very long time. Aside from what I see from like esports orgs. And so I think that it's very effective, and I think that it's warranted, pun intended, here.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're almost at the end. This is the last section here, section 5, other terms and conditions.
Yeah, and this basically goes into two key things. One is, how can this license be terminated? How can you lose your rights under this license? And then 2, how can this license be amended, superseded, modified, etc.? So the termination basically says, if you fail to comply with the terms, it terminates automatically.
Makes sense.
Your license can be reinstated if you fix that violation that you made within a certain amount of time. Here it's 60 days.
Right. Okay, that's actually pretty reasonable depending on what your infraction is.
Right, precisely. So for example, I print something, it violates the license somehow. My license is terminated immediately upon my failure, not upon somebody's notice of my failure. And then if I say, oh crap, I need to fix that, and then I just fix the manuscript or whatever it is, I'm good. And what's interesting is I don't have to destroy any inventory that I already purchased, which is very strange.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, hey, you can violate this as long as you fix it within 60 days.
Yeah, and I also like this: no such termination shall affect, limit, or disrupt the rights of any licensor or downstream licensee of any ORC content. So if you, I don't know, so say I put out a manuscript and you're my publisher and you already start running books for me based on what I did, and then we find out that I violated it, you're not in trouble and your license isn't revoked or usage of this in any way. You're still clean, which is pretty awesome, I think.
Yeah, because what that does is it helps build a foundation. So think of it this way: if you get to Pathfinder 2e, Pathfinder 2e is based on Pathfinder, which is based on 3.5.
Sure.
If for some reason Pathfinder gets wiped out of the licensing chain, you don't want every downstream effect to be gone.
Sure.
Meaning that Pathfinder 2e is not invalidated. Anything based on Pathfinder 2e is not invalidated. And so you don't lose a foundational piece that then knocks down every other domino. It's really smart. It's really good.
And how about these modifications? Because that's something a lot of people worried about with the OGL as well, was that, like, what's going to stop you from just changing this whole thing on us and pulling the rug out from under us whenever you feel like doing it?
I love it because it says it's overthrow. And then they add in deauthorized at the end as a little dig.
Yeah.
It says may not be amended, superseded, modified, updated, repealed, revoked, or deauthorized. That doesn't mean that they can't put out a new version, but the underlying version, this version, once it's out there, is always going to be out there. And then you can actually enter into separate agreements
yeah.
that build on this as long as it doesn't modify the underlying terms.
Interesting.
So you can't enter into a separate agreement to impose a royalty, for example, because
Gotcha.
it would modify the royalty-free term of here. But you can enter into a separate agreement to, say, distribute or assist in some way.
So, to use the Nerd Immersion RPG system as an example, Orc License 1.0 comes out.
Mm-hmm.
I put out Nerd Immersion 1E under the Orc License 1.0, and then they release Orc License 2.0.
Right.
I could release Nerd Immersion Second Edition under Orc 2.0, and have them both exist in perpetuity forever under each iteration of the Orc license, because maybe for one reason or another it made more sense to update, but I didn't feel like going through and changing things from the 1E to the new version of the Orc license, and I'm totally in my legal right to do that.
Precisely.
Now, one thing I do want to talk about is the attribution. So I want to use this because this could possibly be a reason why, right? If I don't want to reprint my backstock because of the way the attribution is written. What do I need if I'm going back to, I think it's the attribution notice, it's 3B.
Right.
What do I need to put in my product to say I'm covered under the Orc license?
Whew. This is where this is a really complicated. And
Okay.
it looks simple, but it is actually fairly complicated. And it's not complicated in that when you put it into practice, it's going to be difficult, but it's complicated to discuss. You know what I mean?
Mm,
So basically, you need to put in a basic statement designating the location in terms of the orc license. And then for the attribution notice, need to attempt to identify each licensor or creator of the underlying content that you used. And anyone else in that as part of those license has been designated to receive attribution, including all people upstream of you.
hmm.
Which, as time goes by,
Yeah.
that is going to be a long list.
So again, using our ever-present Nerd Immersion RPG system here, I create that today
Mm-hmm.
and say this is finalized. All right, so I have to include this product is licensed under Orc license, located at the Library of Congress at blah 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 blah, whatever it is. I put that statement in the copyright page or wherever of my book. It's in
Right.
there. So we got that.
Mm-hmm.
Then I need to license or mention, as you said, identify, probably again in the third or so page on the inside cover where all the legal information typically is contained, each licensor or creator of the orc content I use. So if I made it 100% by myself and nobody else helped me,
Right.
obviously I'm going to identify myself.
Mm-hmm.
But all upstream licensors of orc content upon which my adapted orc content is based on or derived from, if it's the start and it's just me, am I the only person, or are there other people to add into that?
If it's just started, you're the only person. But where this gets really complicated is if you look at expanded universes, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
For example, let's take and say that Marvel decides they want to put Spider-Man into the orc.
Sure. Oh no. Okay.
That attribution is going to be insane because
Right.
current Spider-Man is based on every single iteration dating back to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, years and years and years and years. And if you reference things that happen in other editions or other side-alongs in that same work, then you're going to have the same problem. So this could get unwieldy pretty fast,
Well,
which is I think why I think a reasonable, like maybe 3 layers deep, would be
well,
important.
well. If I'm also reading this correctly, including all upstream licensors of the org content upon which your adapted org license or content is based or derived from. So our content about people deriving and basing things off of this and things going out into like the world again, that needs to be covered too.
Yeah, so basically, if you take someone's content and you adapt it, improve on it, you create widget +1,
Yeah,
you need to credit maker widget as well,
yeah. And if
which you were
this
going to do anyways, quite frankly. So
right, and if but the thing is, if I'm widget plus 13,
yeah, then you have to list widgets widget prime plus 12.
plus 12. Right. And I mean, obviously, but like, what if there's widget 2.5 that then
Yeah,
went back to 3? Like, so this could
goes off
be,
to a fork. And then what if widget 4 and widget 4.5 on separate forks kind of incorporated elements of the other?
that's what so this could, I mean, you could be literally losing pages of your book to this attribution notice. And did they give examples of what this looks like?
They did. So there's
Oh, I
under
see.
D, there's
Okay.
a sample notice
Okay.
that contemplates two works.
I see. Okay, yeah. So here's the license, right? That's the notification at the org
Yeah.
notice that says this is the disclaimer. I hope you like works cited pages, folks, from back in your high school and college days, because it seems like what you're going to be doing if you're going to get stuck in it as it stands right now.
I know.
Um,
You can have a bibliography for your tabletop.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Look at this. It says attribution, right? Then product identity, then expressly designated org content. So you have basically this table you would throw essentially
In.
into your book. And this, obviously, this attribution could be, you know, multiple rows depending on where you
Right.
stand in the instance. I mean, so like obviously some of the things we were talking about, like haha, that's funny, like
Yeah.
we're exaggerating this, but like what if you try to do like a Cobalt Press Black Flag on Pathfinder 2e, right? So you're going to do what they're doing with 5e, but with
Mm-hmm.
Pathfinder 2e. So now you got to do Pathfinder, any iterations and things of Pathfinder, and once they put their stuff into the orc, and
Right.
then, I mean, all like it's just that's I don't know.
Yeah.
Uh,
It can get ridiculous, which is why I think that there is going to be a market for some company to step up here and say, hey, for your attribution, here's your database.
mm,
And if you want to do proper attribution, say this product is compatible with based on the following or content link. I think that is going to be, I'm my bet's on Alchemy to do it, but I'd be surprised to see if somebody didn't do that in a while.
so you're so basically, yeah, taking the onus of all
Mm-hmm.
of this off of somebody else, and like, hey, I'll be your, your
I'll be your
spark.
tech solution.
Yeah, I'll figure out how to do this for you. And I guess that it'd also be generous
Sui generis.
generous database rights.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the basis. Now, we don't have to go through necessarily the answers and explanations. Is there anything in there that's worth us discussing? Because I feel like we did a heavy discussion on this ourselves, but
Yeah. So the answers and explanations is kind of crafted similar to how I normally do my explanation articles.
mhm.
So kudos to them for doing something like that. The it really kind of goes into the basics of things, but one thing to keep in mind is that the answers and explanations document um doesn't necessarily change the draft. You still need to understand what's in the license itself.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Um, Now what's interesting is I don't see an integration clause in the license. Meaning that, an integration clause is what we call a four corners clause. It means that, whatever is on the 4 pages of the document, if it's not in there, then it doesn't count. And
Mm.
so what this basically says is that if I have an email with Azora Law or something like that saying, oh yeah, but this is actually how that works, then that could potentially count. So theoretically, the
Oh.
answers and explanations could affect the license, but I expect them to fix that before launch.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, you've mentioned this before, is that yeah, if it's outside of the 4 corners of the page of which you're reading,
Yeah.
it's like it doesn't exist. But
Yeah,
what you're
exactly.
saying, because it doesn't state that, if I have yeah, like you said, an email or from Azora Law or a text message that is like,
Right.
hey, I wasn't sure how this particular aspect of the orc license works. Could you
Mhm.
just like tell me, like, how does it
Yeah.
work? And they're like, oh yeah, it's like this, and it's slightly different from what's published, I could cite that text message and be like, actually, no, for me, it works like this because text message.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like the prohibition against amending, superseding, modifying, updating, repealing, revoking, or deauthorizing the license may
Cover that.
prevent that, but I would prefer to have it say something express, more like your traditional integration clause. What's
Hmm.
also interesting is it says neither you nor licensor may modify the terms of this orc license. That who's specifically taken out of that?
Who?
Azor Law.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So
Okay, that's a good point.
in theory, that does kind of conflict with the prior sentence.
Yeah, and I'm just looking through their answers and explanations. They hit the high levels, right? Can't be revoked, blah blah blah.
Right.
Who controls it? Nobody, right? It's not. It's gonna. I think they said they're also
Right.
gonna. Currently, it's with Azor Law, but I believe originally they stated once it's at like a good point, they were looking to turn it over to some nonprofit so that it's like out of everybody's hands.
Which is something that we're still discussing, specifically where that's going to be. And I will say that those conversations have been very good.
Okay, that's awesome. So yeah, this, and again, for folks who are unaware, the reasoning behind that is kind of almost what we just talked about, right? Azor Law potentially based on that could change things, but ultimately, if the license resides with nobody invested in this, and this is kind of just like a, I don't know, like a Switzerland kind of policy here. We built it. Here it is. It's all done. We have no ownership of it. It goes to somebody else. They can maintain it, do whatever they want it. Like they have it. It lives with them now. We can't touch it, and that
Yeah.
kind of gives an extra level of protection, which again is ultimately what WotC ended up doing by turning things over into Creative Commons. Is like, this is out of our hands now. We couldn't change it even if we wanted to. Um, I do like that they put in a point that says, "Why is this license so complicated?"
Yeah, I saw that
And
too.
they're like, "We wish it was less complicated, but we opted for simplicity wherever possible. But when we faced with a decision where with between precision or simplicity, we opted for precision." Um, so they're even addressing things like, is this double the length of the OGL? But like they're trying to, especially in the contract sensitive climate we find ourselves in nowadays,
Yeah.
you need to be mindful of that. So,
Yeah.
um, okay, can I use it for a board game? They even say that, yes. What about digital rights? Digital rights are included. It's inevitable. It's forever. There are no SRDs, right? That's the thing, right?
Right.
Because it's not giving you rights to anybody's content. You can put your content in it if you
Right.
so choose.
It doesn't require an SRD. It could be a sub part of a piece of content.
Yeah, so like just because you're using the orc doesn't mean you have license to use all of Chaosium stuff for Call of Cthulhu. It's not how that works.
Yeah.
It's like, but that also means that Chaosium couldn't use your stuff,
Right.
unless you could make your own SRD to exist within the orc license so that other people can iterate on it. And again, part of our conversation from the start, why you would want to have that. So if the Nerd Immersion RPG has a vast, immense world and lore building, lore and world building stuff in it, and I think it's so cool that I want people to be able to use it, I could develop my own system reference document and dump it into the orc or have it be part of the orc.
Precisely.
And then you could use my content in the way you see fit. Or I
Yeah.
could just say, here's my game, like not necessarily the mechanics, but kind of.
Hmm.
Here's that in the orc. You can go and make games or make hacks of my game, like we see constantly happening with, Power by the Apocalypse has been hacked into oblivion.
Yeah.
I don't even
Yeah.
know if it has a base version anymore. Like it's just,
Probably somewhere in there.
but who knows?
Yeah.
Everybody is that. It's expanded into everything.
Hmm.
And they even go on to talk about the newest Hollywood blockbuster. Can I
Yeah,
build?
basically saying, hey, you can use this to build an RPG for that Hollywood blockbuster. You don't have to put any of the IP back in. Come on, Stranger Things tabletop. And which it would be ironic if Stranger Things came out with its own tabletop, right?
That would be
After it
hilarious.
repopularized D&D for pop culture.
That would be hilarious, yeah.
But yeah, so you can put that out there too.
And they even go on to answer the question as to why not Creative Commons. Even so much as addressing Wizards using CC BY 4.0.
Yeah.
So I feel like I think I have a pretty good understanding of the orc license now. Again, it is a draft, as very well
Right.
denoted that it is a draft, which means it is subject to change.
Yeah.
But we're looking at 19 days. They want to have this thing wrapped up and published.
It's ambitious.
Yeah, so I hope our little conversation here. I'll put links in the description to all of the various orc related things that we talked about and reviewed, as well as a link to their Discord if you guys want to join it to jump into the conversation. But hopefully, this helps dispel a little bit of the mystery around it. Because up until maybe a week or two ago, I had a ton of people saying, like, whatever happened to this?
To the orc. Yeah,
Yeah, because it just kind
absolutely.
of disappeared off of everybody's. Everybody's like, oh, remember that? I guess it's not important anymore because Wizards did Creative Commons, so nobody cares anymore.
Which is why, frankly, in the last 2 weeks, there's been a flurry of activity with the people that have been working on it on the back end. Post PAX, it was very much, hey, we kind of need to move on this.
Hmm.
So this kind of kicked the butts in gear, which was really nice.
Yeah. So, anything else you think the people should know about the Orc license or what to expect? I mean, if I have something that I'm going to make that isn't explicitly 5e based, I would likely use this, just because it, like you said, it kind of it covers me.
Yeah,
Uh, I mean, especially if you're looking to, once we see what other, because we know that 2e Pathfinder 2e will be dumped into this once it's published. They said they're going to transition once like their printed stock is gone, of stuff with the OGL.
yeah,
Then they're going to switch everything over to the Orc. So you could potentially be publishing your second edition Pathfinder supplements under the Orc in that aspect. Or again, depending on how in depth things with Project Black Flag or Chaosium or whoever else is
right.
in this, you may be using it more often than you thought. Or again, like you said, to do your own personal projects.
Right, precisely. Yeah, I think we're gonna see there's definitely gonna be changes to this document. I've already seen changes from this document from me a couple of days ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um a couple days prior to when it was posted.
Right.
There's definitely gonna be changes, so just kind of keep an eye out there. You have a version to compare now, so just keep that in mind that this is a good push pin.
Mm-hmm.
And when you want to put the documents side by side, you'll see where people are thinking about things. I do want to see that integration clause the more I think about it.
Sure.
Um, add it into the modification section. So
Well, it's not a very. It doesn't sound like it's a very um, laborious effort to add in something
yeah,
like that, and for what you're gonna get for it, seems like a good call.
yeah, precisely. So yeah, man.
Awesome. Well, it's always good to have you here, especially when legal related things seem to crop up, as they have significantly more than they ever have in the history of tabletop gaming recently.
Dude, I'll tell you what, at some point I just want to hop on and talk to you about my podcast instead of like just like
You know,
D&D legal stuff.
that would be something, especially, well, yeah, we'll see what happens with this. Everybody has their article or their video about the creator summit as well, which is something else that's been on everybody's mind. But
Yeah, you and I should discuss that as well because you were an in-person attendee and I was a virtual attendee, which is the first time I've said that publicly to anybody. So,
oh, there you go. Now it's on the internet forever.
oh no.
But speaking of your podcast, before we jump out of here, anything you want to promote that you've got going on, or where people can find you?
Absolutely. Yeah, so if you want to find me folks, you can follow me on Twitch, Twitter, and TikTok at my lawyer friend. Actually, perfect timing. Next month I'm going to be streaming a lot because I'm fundraising for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. It's one of the only times I stream regularly during the year. In addition, you were gracious enough to give a shout out to my podcast the last time I came out, and it did amazingly for me. So I'll shout out again. That is the Forgotten Paths podcast. It is an amnesia campaign, does use 5e. And we just completed episode 60, which is the season finale. So if you're looking for a complete story, you have one. We actually finished a campaign. We beat the scheduling monster, and there's
Nice.
61-hour episodes, and you can find that again wherever podcasts are found. That is Forgotten Paths. Thanks, bud.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming out, and hopefully it's a long time before we have to talk about anything like this ever again. So,
Thanks, man.
see you next time.